Well, my next guest is building a kind of electronic safety net under the U.S. Treasury to evaluate bank data and prevent another financial meltdown. No easy task there. John Liechty is a professor at Penn State University, and he's visiting New York here today. And John, good to have you stop by. Certainly sounds like a formidable yet very important task. How do you prevent the next meltdown? Some key issues here, right? Number one, how do you get this data from the banks?
Okay, well, first of all, I should clarify that this is no longer my project. This is in part of the Dodd-Frank legislation. There's been created a new office in Treasury, the Office of Financial Research.
Right.
And that's been given the authority.
But you were a champion.
I was a champion for this. I was a champion for legislation. It's kind of like sending your kid off to college. It's been done now. It's now with the U.S. Treasury. So I'm not actually involved in the physical putting down. I want Treasury to be aware that I have that clear in my mind. But the challenge is daunting nonetheless, but it's doable. When we first came up with this idea about a year and a half ago at a workshop, some of us were thinking, this is what we really need. You need to be able to see the whole financial system. You need to see how the firms interconnect. You need to see how the markets and the flow of information goes, how the economy loads on these things. And when stress happens, how can it propagate? What type of failures might happen like we saw in 2008? And we said, well, the first thing you need is really to get the data together. And we were kind of wondering, is this possible? And then we ran into some guys from IBM and Morgan Stanley who had kind of similar ideas. And these guys are real experts in how you actually piece together, build the IT systems. And they felt it could be done. So,
and it could be done. And I was asking you during the break, well, how do you get this data? And you kind of jokingly said, well, you just ask for it. But it is a lot more complicated than that, right? Because this data is all different, right?
In some ways, it's not that much more complicated.
Okay.
What you have to do, first of all, is get the standards in place across the industry. So you've got to get standardized reporting formats. You've got to get standardized reference databases. Everybody has to use the same unique ID for companies, financial instruments. And right now, the industry doesn't have that in place. Everybody's got to get all the trades and put them in an electronic repository so that their firm has everything on hand and can just send it, kind of like cleaning up the back office.
Okay.
If you get the back office cleaned up and the trade comes to get cleared, then you just need an electronic CC going into a repository. But it's got to be with consistent standards. So the first task the OFR has is to help establish the right standards, the right reference databases, standardize the data, and not only will that help the OFR, it'll help the industry.
OFR meaning the Office of Financial Research,
Sorry,
right? Which is, I know there's all these acronyms, but that is the office created in the U.S. Treasury to collect all this data. Okay, this is why people are calling it the Apollo Project, though, right? Is because once you get that data and you standardize it, then how do you find out? How do you calibrate all of that in order to find out where's the next risk, right?
Exactly. What you're looking for is you're looking for threats to financial stability, and nobody really has seriously looked at how the financial system works, particularly under stress. Right? It's very big, it's very complex, and it's dynamic. It's changing all of the time.
Right.
So you've got to be able to document all of that. You've got to be able to, there's a lot of things that are consistent, and we really have a shot at getting a good understanding. We need to be able to understand.
How big of a shot? I mean, I know this is years in it, but how big of a shot do we have to prevent the next crisis?
Well, I'll put it this way. I think if the OFR is successful, Office of Financial Research is successful, and the Stability Council that it's going to be supporting is successful, what you'll see is the next crisis will be 30, 40 years out instead of maybe 5 or 10 years out. That's the way I'd measure the success. You're never going to be able to completely eliminate the chances of finding the next risk, but we want to minimize that. We want to see when you could actually have aggregations like we're seeing in the mortgage marketplace, right? That nobody was picking up system-wide. We have to see those aggregations. We have to understand what happens when the prices fall, who's going to be in stress, how that's going to propagate. That's the real problem. The real challenge is how do you model where prices are going to go when people can't hedge, when the market has no liquidity? Okay,
John, very interesting. Good work there, and I know the government's taking that over, but in the meantime, I appreciate you coming up with the idea and pushing that forward. John Liechty of Penn State University.